The Boston Bruins are in a fight for first place, both in the Atlantic Division and overall. Ian McLaren of Locked On Bruins is here to talk about that and all things Boston Bruins next on the Locked On NHL Podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome, everybody, to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen of the day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you can get new episodes as soon as they drop. Today's episode is brought to you by Sleeper. Download the Sleeper app and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL to get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. It is great to welcome back to the show the host of Locked On Boston Bruins, Ian McLaren. And Ian, really intense time for the Bruins right now, fighting for first place in the division, fighting for the President's Trophy. But yet they're struggling a little bit as of late with consistency. What's been different recently than what's been going on most of the season?
I think, the Bruins got off to a fantastic start to the season, and that really propelled them into first place. I think they started like 14-1-3 or something like that prior to Thanksgiving, and they had a fairly easy schedule to begin the year, which really set them up for success. So they have been, sitting at or near the top of the Atlantic Division for most of the season. But now we're seeing them play against teams that are fighting for their playoff lives or fighting for playoff positioning. And we're seeing the Bruins have to step up and match that level of intensity. And that's, a little bit what they've been struggling with. They're also, first in the NHL in terms of shootout and overtime losses. So really closing games out has been a struggle for them all season long. They've done a good job of that recently, and most recently on Saturday when they played the Capitals and had a 4-minute power play that they successfully killed off in overtime before winning in the shootout. So those are the kinds of things that head coach Jim Montgomery and the team have been working on, kind of finishing games, ramping up that playoff intensity, and trying to avoid what happened last year, which was being caught by a hot team at the wrong time in the first round of the playoffs.
How important is it for this Bruins team to win the division and or win the President's Trophy?
I mean, it would be nice, especially in a centennial season, to win the President's Trophy, just to have that kind of hardware to go along with this historic season. But I would think if you would ask most fans and most players, they would say it's not incredibly important because of what happened last year. They had the most points in NHL history. They ran away with the President's Trophy, and within a couple weeks, their season was done because they weren't able to finish out the Florida Panthers in the first round. So I would think it would be nice. But at the end of the day, you want to head into the playoffs playing the right way. That's what's most important. We've seen time and time again, no matter who you're matched up against, it could be the most favorable matchup in the playoffs. Anything can happen once those 16 teams started. It's just completely different hockey, a completely different season. And for me, what's most important is that they're playing the right way and that they're set up to succeed. Not to diminish from the President's Trophy. It's a significant award. It's, it's kept on the record books and things like that. But we saw what happened last year. It would be a nice bonus, but most fans are more concerned about what happens beyond game 82. That's just the reality of pro sports. That's what means most is playoff success. And so winning the Atlantic probably means the difference between playing the Toronto Maple Leafs in round one, but you could still end up playing the Tampa Bay Lightning in round one as well as a wild card team. So first overall would be nice to play, say, those Washington Capitals if they're able to squeak in. But again, it doesn't guarantee anything. So I wouldn't say it's incredibly important to finish first overall or first in the division at least.
How much is the specter of that early playoff exit from a year ago hanging over this team right now?
I mean, for me personally, it wasn't as devastating or disappointing as losing Game 7 in the Stanley Cup Final on home ice back in 2019. That, even if you get beyond the first round, there's no guarantee that you're going to get past the second or even to the Stanley Cup Final. To be that close 5 years ago and to not have that Stanley Cup, that really stung. But it has hung over this team all year long in the sense, what I was discussing earlier, that failure to close out. They were, Brad Marchand could have won Game 5 against the Panthers with a breakaway. They had overtime losses in Games 5 and 7. They had lead in Game 7 against the Panthers and still couldn't finish it out. So that really has hung over this team every time they blow a lead or lose in overtime. It's, what has this team learned from that experience? You want to see some growth, evolution. Obviously, it's a completely different team without Patrice Bergeron and David Krejci, and this was meant to be kind of a bridge year, a transition year where they'll have a lot of money to spend this summer. But the expectations are always very high with this franchise, and that loss certainly still hangs over the guys that remain. And I know Brad Marchand specifically as captain would love to see, make your mark as team captain by winning in the playoffs. So I know that he would like to really erase what happened last season.
So here we are in the home stretch of the regular season. What are some of the things the Bruins need to work on to get to playing the right way, as you described earlier?
Yeah, I mean, it all comes back to closing out games. They've had very poor results playing late in the game when the other team has the goalie pulled. They've given up a lot of late game goals for the tie. Probably not as physical as some fans would like them to be. Hopefully, Pat Maroon can get into the lineup at some point and add that element. And just really having that killer instinct and not coasting at all, but just keeping the foot on the gas until the final buzzer goes. It's really cliche, but that's really what this team needs, just to erase that kind of, everything's good, we can just coast until the playoffs. Really, no, the playoff mentality in the NHL begins. It's already begun. You can see it night in and night out around the NHL right now. And you can't afford to wait until Game 82 is done to get into playoff mode. You have to get there like now or a couple weeks ago even to succeed in the postseason.
David Pastrnak having such a great year, close to 50 goals, but not quite there. Do you think he makes it? And what will it take?
Yeah, I mean, on any given night, he's a guy that could score 1, 2, 3 goals. So I think he's on pace right now for 49 goals if he's able to play. But what's impressed me with him is that he's already set a career high in assists, which it might be more important for the Bruins. Again, having lost those top two centers, he's developed into not just an elite goal scorer, but an elite play driver, and he can facilitate scoring from some other guys as well. So that, the fact that his goal total is a bit down from last season, but he's still over 100 points on track for almost a career year because of the helpers that have risen. That has been a huge benefit to the Bruins as a whole. It'd be great to get to 50. He's, on track to become one of, if not the top goal scorer in Boston Bruins history, if he remains with the team for his whole career. So every one of those milestones just cements his claim as one of the best scorers in team history for sure.
Ian, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
Locked On Boston Bruins, available on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. You can find it on social media at Locked NHL Bruins, and you can find me at Ian C. McLaren.
All right, Ian, thanks so much. Always a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks, Gil.
Today's episode is brought to you by Sleeper. Regardless of where your favorite team is in the standings, I want to remind you that you can win big playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. Sleeper is our number one choice for daily fantasy sports and especially daily fantasy hockey, because with Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. All you have to do is pick whether studs like McDavid, Crosby, or McKinnon will record more or less than their sleeper projections for things like goals, assists, saves, plus minus, and more in a given game. To win a 100 times bet on Sleeper, you need to correctly predict the outcome of 8 player stats. You heard me, hockey fans. You can win 100 times your money playing daily fantasy hockey with Sleeper. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL. You'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability.